Hello, and welcome to Walking and Talking with Mrs. Smith. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for clicking on my video. And if you're not aware, I'm Mrs. Smith and I'm a Christian. And today I'm walking in Ashford, Warren and Hodes Wood in Kent in the UK. And it's a large nature reserve here owned by Ashford Borough Council and I think it's managed by Kent Wildlife Trust. It's lovely here. So today I'm talking about why the Bible is split in two halves. This was a talk recommended to me by my son's lovely partner Rachel, so huge thanks to Rachel for suggesting this subject. So if you're not aware, the Christian Bible is split into two sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the original Hebrew version, believed to be written between about 1200 to 165 BC or before Christ, and it's a way of counting years before the birth of Jesus. And the second section, the New Testament, is the original Greek version, believed to be written by Christians in the 1st century or AD, Anno Domini, or after Christ. So it's counted from the birth of Jesus, basically. Incidentally, if you're watching this and you're a younger person, the terms BC and AD aren't really used in British schools much anymore. I think BC has now become BCE, or before the Common Era, and AD has now become CE, or Common Era. These new terms are apparently used to promote religious neutrality and to be sensitive to people who aren't Christians. Even C of E or Christian schools in Britain have to take a neutral stance these days. Actually, the term Common Era appeared in English in the 18th century, so it's not actually really a new thing at all. But going back to the Christian Bible, though, the Bible isn't just split into two halves, and it's not just one book either. It's about 66 smaller books. 66 I think it is, smaller books with stories, songs, poetry, letters, histories, all sort of combined. So what are the Old Testament and the New Testament about? Well, to be honest, it can get a bit complicated, so I will try and keep it really simple. I need it to be simple anyway. The Old Testament has 39 books in it, and it was written over a long period of time, and it talks about the ancient nation of Israel. First 5 books, Genesis to Deuteronomy, which Jewish people call the Torah, set the scene, you know, how God created the world, and they include stories with examples of how people were meant to live, as well as requirements by law. And these 5 books were later called the Pentateuch, I think is how you pronounce it, which just means a group of 5. The Prophets is probably the largest section of the Hebrew Bible, and that has 2 parts. There's former prophets and latter prophets. If you're not aware, a prophet is a person who speaks for God in the present, or a person who tells what will happen in the future, or maybe both. The former prophets, also known as the histories, consist of Joshua, Judges, 1 and 2 Samuel, and 1 and 2 Kings, and they're mainly history books. But what makes them also prophets is that they record information and explain its significance in relation to other events in the history of Israel and of the world. The books of latter prophets include stories of religious and political prophets who served as spiritual conscience of the nation, I guess, throughout history, reminding people of the social values that reflected the character of God. Sometimes the prophets would act out short spoken messages, and sometimes they'd do that in poetry, which made it easier for others to remember them, because mainly back then things weren't written down, but later they were written down. Then there are writings which include psalms or songs, prayers, and structures for how to worship. And then there's proverbs, which are sayings of wisdom. There's Job, kind of like a drama that looks at the nature of suffering, plus 5 manuscripts, which were grouped together because each had associations with a particular religious festival. So there was Ruth, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and Esther. The Old Testament also includes the last books of the Hebrew Bible to be written, which were Ezra, Nehemiah, and 1 and 2 Chronicles, which were all history books, and then the book of Daniel. Daniel's visions are packed with imagery, futuristic imagery, which offered hope to the Israelites who were living like refugees. While all of this was written a long time ago, we as Christians still believe that there's like a really deep value to reading the Old Testament, as it demonstrates how God has worked in the lives of people over many years. And as well as the historical events being interesting, Christians believe that there is always a spiritual lesson in the Old Testament books which can be applied to our lives today. So we still read them regularly. The stories and the histories in the Old Testament are still kind of reflective of how we live. They record how people wouldn't listen to God, often doing their own thing, much like we still do today. And they also record things like wars and injustice and so on. So they really are quite down to earth and actually a fascinating read. So what about the New Testament? Well, the New Testament has 27 books. That's right, 27 books in it. And it was written between about 48 to 90 AD, although there is some differences of opinion on that. But I think that they fall naturally into 4 sections. Personally, I think they fall naturally into 4 sections. Not everyone thinks that, but that's what I think. There's the Gospels, which tell the story of Jesus in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The book of Acts, which tells the story of the early church developing. The letters or epistles, as they're sometimes called, which were written by various Christian leaders to provide guidance, really, for the early church communities. And the book of Revelation, which is very similar to Daniel in the Old Testament, really, as it's got lots of images of the future in it. So the Gospels were written about the life and teachings of Jesus in 4 different ways. So you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to be able to appeal to different audiences, really. And for that reason, they're written from different viewpoints. So they were not intended to be biographies of Jesus, really, but more accounts that sort of demonstrated his significance and the things that he did and said. The first 3 Gospels are effectively different editions of the same thing. But the writer of Luke also wrote the book of Acts. Just to say, I said the first 3 Gospels. What I really mean is Matthew, Mark, and John. Luke is the 3rd Gospel. But Luke also wrote the book of Acts, or Acts of the Apostles, as it's known, which tells the story of how Christianity spread from being a small group of Jewish believers in the time of Jesus to becoming a worldwide faith in less than a generation, actually. The letters were the way for traveling church leaders to communicate with like new converts, I guess. The books of Romans and Hebrews, they offered advice to people who were working out how to express their commitment to Jesus in ways that would be relevant to the different cultural context in which they found themselves throughout the whole Roman Empire. Paul was probably the most high volume writer of such letters. I mean, you've probably heard me mention him before if you've watched my videos in the past. The New Testament then ends with the book of Revelation, which begins with a series of letters to 7 churches in the area of modern day Turkey. It was called Asia Minor. But then it offers like a visionary presentation of the meaning of all things from the beginning of creation right to the end of the world. So again, the New Testament is a fascinating read. Every time I read it, it always hits me hard just how amazing a person Jesus is. And for me, as a Christian, to know and understand Jesus, that's the centre of everything it means to be a Christian for me, and millions more like me. Yeah, Jesus is the New Testament, really. And I find that my faith grows when I spend time with God reading the Bible, and I can personally see how the Bible, the Word of God, is spiritually discerned. It's not just a text or a history book for my intellect. It's more than that. It's one of the ways that I connect to God and that God connects to me. I find it amazing, that despite its length, despite its sometimes controversial and graphic content, and despite it having more than 20 English language translations, I think each available in about 25 or more different editions. Honestly, the choice of Bibles bewilders me. It's sold between 5 and 7 billion copies so far, I believe. In fact, I think it's still the best-selling book of all time in the Guinness Book of Records. If I'm wrong about that, then please do let me know in the comments, because sometimes I am wrong about these things. But if I'm not wrong, wow, there must be a reason for it. There must be a reason that many are sold. Maybe if you haven't got a copy, you could go and get one and see what all the fuss is about. Well, I hope that I've kind of managed to give you a reasonable overview of why the Bible is split into 2 halves. But, if you feel I've left anything out, then please do let me know in the comments. And if you found my talk helpful or interesting, then please hit that thumbs up button for me and subscribe to my channel. And if you click the notification bell as well, you'll know as soon as I upload more content. But in the meantime, though, it is raining, so I'm going to leave it there. But thank you so much for walking and talking with me again. God bless you all, and I will see you next time. Bye.